The cruelest thing about losing someone isn't the goodbye. It's waking up every day and finding new ways to miss them. Every Sunday at exactly 9 in the morning, I stood in the same place with the same bouquet of white roses in my hands. Rain, snow, summer heat. It didn't matter. For 2 years, nothing had stopped me from making that trip. The cemetery sat on a quiet hill overlooking the Hudson, where the wind carried the scent of wet grass and old memories. Most people visited graves on birthdays or anniversaries. I came every week because one day a year wasn't enough for the woman who had changed my life. The polished granite headstone looked exactly as it had the first day they placed it there. Emily Carter, beloved daughter, beloved friend, beloved teacher. The words never got easier to read. I crouched down and replaced last week's flowers with fresh ones. White roses. Her favorite. She used to say white roses looked honest. Not flashy, not dramatic. Just beautiful because they didn't pretend to be anything else. That sounded like Emily. Honest. Kind. The exact opposite of me. I brushed a few fallen leaves away from the base of the stone and stared at her name longer than I should have. Sometimes I wondered if grief was just another form of punishment. Maybe this was the bill finally coming due for every mistake I'd ever made. Every selfish decision. Every moment I chose power when I should have chosen her. 2 years. 730 days. And I still reached for my phone whenever something happened that would make her laugh. I still drove past the little coffee shop where she used to spend Saturday mornings grading papers. I still caught myself looking for her in crowded places. The worst part was that I could still hear her voice. Clear as sunlight. Like she had only stepped out of the room and would be back any minute. You worry too much, Damien. I smiled despite myself. She used to say that all the time. Back when she believed there was still something worth saving inside me. The wind picked up, carrying a chill through my black coat. Across the cemetery, families moved quietly between headstones. A father holding his daughter's hand. An elderly couple standing shoulder to shoulder. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. The kind of life Emily always wanted. The kind of life I never knew how to give her. I'm trying, I whispered. My voice sounded strange in the open air. I know it's late. I know I should have figured it out sooner. But I'm trying. The confession disappeared into the wind. There was nobody left to hear it. Nobody except a woman beneath 6 feet of earth. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. I ignored it. Sundays belonged to Emily. The phone vibrated again. Then a third time. Reluctantly, I pulled it out. The message came from Michael Russo, the only friend who had stayed after everything fell apart. Attached was a photograph. At first, I almost deleted it. Then I saw her face. My heart stopped. The world stopped. The cemetery vanished. The wind vanished. Everything vanished except the image on my screen. A woman stepping out of a bookstore in Boston. Blonde hair catching the sunlight. Blue sweater. Familiar smile. It couldn't be. It was impossible. My hands started shaking anyway. Beneath the photograph was a single message. Damien, I think you need to see this. Because the woman in that picture looks exactly like Emily. I stared at the photograph until the screen dimmed in my hand. Then I tapped it awake and looked again. Same blonde hair. Same smile. Same way she tilted her head slightly whenever she was distracted by something outside the frame. My chest felt tight. Not with hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was the thing that had nearly destroyed me 2 years ago. Emily was gone. I had attended the funeral. I had stood beside her parents while the minister spoke. I had watched them lower the casket into the ground. I had spent 730 days teaching myself to survive a future without her. Dead people did not casually walk out of bookstores in Boston. My phone rang before I could think any further. Michael. I answered immediately. Tell me this is some kind of mistake. Silence filled the line for a moment. I wish I could, he said. I checked the image 3 times before sending it. I began walking toward my car without remembering the decision. The cemetery disappeared behind me. Where did it come from? Private investigator. My grip tightened around the phone. Why were you running an investigation? Another pause. Because every year around this time, you get worse. I closed my eyes briefly. He was not wrong. Michael. Listen to me, Damien. I did not tell you because I never expected anything to come from it. I just wanted answers. For you. I opened the driver's door and slid behind the wheel. The leather felt cold. And now I think you need to see the rest. A new message arrived. More photographs. 3 this time. The same woman carrying a stack of books. The same woman crossing a street. The same woman sitting outside a coffee shop with a cup in her hands. Every image looked ordinary. That was what frightened me most. There was no mystery, no disguise, no dramatic revelation. Just a woman living her life. A life that looked painfully familiar. My heart pounded harder with every swipe. When were these taken? I asked. Last week. I stared through the windshield. Rain clouds were gathering over the river. Dark gray shadows stretching across the water. That is impossible. I know. Emily died. I know. I buried her. His voice softened. I know. The words hung between us. Neither of us believed them anymore. I looked down at the final photograph. The woman was laughing at something outside the frame. The expression hit me harder than any evidence could have. Because it was not just her face. It was her. The warmth. The kindness. The light that always seemed to follow her into every room. I remembered Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. I remembered coffee stains on lesson plans. I remembered the way she always stopped to help strangers. Suddenly the distance between memory and possibility felt terrifyingly small. Where in Boston? I asked quietly. Michael exhaled. I knew you would say that. Another message arrived. An address. A neighborhood. A bookstore. I started the engine. For the first time in 2 years, I did not drive away from the cemetery feeling empty. I drove away feeling afraid. Because if Emily was truly alive, then everything I believed about the last 2 years was a lie. I left New York before sunrise. The highway stretched ahead beneath a sky the color of cold steel, and every mile felt unreal. Boston was a little over 200 miles away, but the distance between what I knew and what I was beginning to believe felt much larger. I had spent 2 years convincing myself that grief was permanent. Now a single photograph had turned certainty into confusion. The address Michael sent led to a quiet neighborhood lined with brick buildings, small cafes, and bookstores that looked untouched by time. The kind of place Emily would have loved. I parked across the street from the bookstore and sat behind the wheel for nearly 20 minutes. My hands rested on the steering wheel, motionless. I had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without hesitation. I had made impossible decisions under pressure. Yet I could not bring myself to open a car door. Because if the woman in those photographs was not Emily, then I would lose her all over again. Eventually I stepped outside. The morning air carried the smell of coffee and rain. People hurried past with paper cups in their hands, focused on ordinary lives. Nobody paid attention to me. For the first time in years, I was grateful for that. The bookstore sat on the corner with large front windows filled with novels and handwritten recommendations. I crossed the street slowly and stopped on the opposite sidewalk. Then I saw her. My heart forgot how to beat. She stood inside near a display table, arranging books into neat stacks. Blonde hair pulled back loosely. Blue sweater. Gentle smile. The same woman from the photographs. The same woman from my memories. For a moment, the world became silent. I could not hear traffic. I could not hear footsteps. I could not hear anything except the sound of my own breathing. She laughed at something a customer said. The expression was so familiar that my chest physically hurt. Emily used to laugh like that when she was trying not to. Like joy surprised her every time it arrived. I took one step forward. Then another. My reflection appeared faintly in the bookstore window. She glanced up. Our eyes met. Time stopped. Every version of the future I had imagined collapsed into that single second. I expected shock, recognition, anything. Instead, confusion crossed her face. Polite confusion. The expression a stranger gives another stranger. She looked away almost immediately and continued arranging books. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. My stomach dropped. No recognition. No reaction. Nothing. The woman looked exactly like Emily Carter. She sounded like Emily Carter. She smiled like Emily Carter. Yet when she looked at me, there was absolutely nothing in her eyes. A bell chimed above the bookstore door as a customer entered. She greeted them warmly and returned to work. Meanwhile, I remained outside, struggling to understand what I had just seen. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Michael appeared on the screen. Did you find her? I looked through the window again. She was helping an elderly customer reach a book on a high shelf. Completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I finally typed 3 words. Yes, but something is wrong. There is a specific kind of fear that comes with getting your miracle and realizing it might not belong to you. I spent the next 3 hours across the street pretending to drink coffee that had long gone cold. People entered the bookstore. People left. The woman I had buried 2 years ago continued living a life that did not include me. Around noon, she locked the front door for a lunch break and stepped outside carrying a canvas bag over her shoulder. My pulse immediately quickened. She walked 3 blocks before entering a small cafe with blue awnings and flower boxes beneath the windows. I followed at a distance, feeling ridiculous and desperate at the same time. Emily had once told me that desperation made people reveal who they truly were. If she were right, then I was learning uncomfortable things about myself. Through the cafe window, I watched her order a sandwich and sit near the front. A little girl accidentally dropped a coloring book while passing her table. Without hesitation, the woman picked it up, smiled, and helped gather the scattered crayons. The child grinned. The woman grinned back. My chest tightened. Emily had always done things like that. Small kindnesses nobody noticed. Tiny moments that seemed insignificant until they were gone. I pulled out my phone and opened the photographs I still carried. Hundreds of them. Birthdays. Road trips. Ordinary Saturdays. There she was standing beside a pumpkin patch. There she was laughing with a cup of hot chocolate in both hands. There she was sitting on a park bench reading a novel. Then I looked through the cafe window again. The similarities were unbearable. Same smile. Same gestures. Same warmth. Yet when she had looked at me earlier, there had been nothing. Not even a flicker of recognition. My phone buzzed. Michael. I answered immediately. Tell me you found something. Papers shuffled on the other end. Actually, I did. I sat up straighter. The bookstore employee records list her as Emma Bennett. The name hit me strangely. Emma Bennett. Not Emily Carter. Not even close. How long has she lived here? According to public records, almost 22 months. My stomach dropped. 22 months. Nearly the exact amount of time Emily had supposedly been gone. I stared at the woman through the window. Emma. Emily. Whoever she was. She laughed softly at something in a book she had opened while eating lunch. There is more, Michael said carefully. I cannot find anything before that. What do you mean? I mean there is no college record. No employment history. No apartment leases. Nothing older than 22 months. I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sunlight. Everyone leaves a trail. Credit cards. School records. Medical paperwork. Something. You are saying she appeared out of nowhere. That is exactly what I am saying. Silence settled between us. Across the street, the woman closed her book and stood. Sunlight caught her hair for a brief second, and suddenly a memory crashed into me. Rain falling against a windshield. A dark road. A pair of blue eyes looking at me for the very first time. The night everything began. The night Emily Carter stepped into my life and quietly changed it forever. Some memories arrive like photographs. Others arrive like storms. I sat in my rental car long after the woman disappeared from view, staring at nothing while the past slowly unfolded inside my head. 2 years earlier, I had been a man everyone feared and nobody truly knew. My calendar was full. My phone never stopped ringing. My name opened doors and closed conversations. Yet every night I returned to an empty penthouse that felt larger and colder than it should have. Success is a strange thing. People spend their lives chasing it, only to discover it cannot sit beside you when the room goes quiet. The first time I met Emily Carter, it was raining hard enough to blur the city lights into streaks of gold and white. I remember because she was standing beneath a broken bus stop shelter, holding an umbrella that the wind had nearly destroyed. Most people looked away when my car pulled up. Emily did not. She looked directly at me with those clear blue eyes as if I were just another person standing in the rain. Nothing more. Nothing less. I should have forgotten her after that night. Instead, I found myself thinking about her days later. Then weeks later. Then constantly. She worked as an elementary school teacher in Brooklyn. She loved old bookstores, bad coffee, and rescue dogs. She cried during movies even when she knew the ending. She believed every person deserved a second chance, especially the people who thought they did not. Looking back, I think that was the beginning of everything. Not love. Not yet. Curiosity. The dangerous kind. The kind that slowly becomes attachment before you realize what is happening. I remembered sitting across from her in a small diner one winter evening. Snow falling outside. Steam rising from a cup of coffee between her hands. She had asked me a question nobody else ever asked. Are you happy? Such a simple question. I had negotiated contracts worth millions of dollars. I had answered reporters, lawyers, investors, and politicians. Yet I could not answer her. Because the truth was embarrassing. I had everything except the thing that mattered. Emily smiled softly when I failed to respond. That is okay, she had said. Most people need time to figure that one out. The memory felt so vivid that for a moment I could almost hear her voice. Then reality returned. The bookstore. The woman calling herself Emma Bennett. The impossible resemblance. The missing 22 months. I opened my phone again and enlarged one of the photographs Michael had sent. My pulse quickened immediately. There was something I had missed before. Around her neck hung a silver necklace. Small, simple, easy to overlook. Except I knew that necklace. Because years ago, on her 26th birthday, I had given it to Emily. I stared at the image until my vision blurred. Then I whispered the only thought left in my mind. If you are really alive, why did you never come back? The necklace changed everything. Until that moment, there had still been room for doubt. A resemblance could be coincidence. A familiar smile could be my imagination refusing to let go. But the necklace was real. I remembered the afternoon I bought it. A small jewelry shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. Emily had laughed when I gave it to her because it was so simple. No diamonds. No extravagance. Just a silver pendant shaped like a compass. Why a compass? She had asked. I told her it was because she was the only thing in my life that ever pointed me in the right direction. She wore it every day after that. Now it hung around the neck of a woman calling herself Emma Bennett. I did not sleep that night. My hotel room overlooked the Charles River, but the view might as well have been a blank wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her inside that bookstore. The confusion on her face when she looked at me. The complete absence of recognition. By 6 in the morning, I was sitting in the lobby with a cup of coffee and a growing sense that I needed answers more than I needed caution. The bookstore opened at 9. I arrived at 8:30. The street was quiet except for delivery trucks and a few early commuters. I watched through the window as employees prepared for the day. Then she appeared. My pulse immediately betrayed me. She carried a box of books across the room and smiled at one of her coworkers. Normal, relaxed, happy. None of it made sense. At exactly 9 o'clock, I crossed the street and opened the bookstore door. A small bell chimed overhead. The scent of paper and coffee filled the air. For a moment, nobody noticed me. Then she looked up from behind the counter. Blue eyes met mine. The same eyes I had dreamed about for 2 years. Good morning, she said warmly. Can I help you find something? Her voice nearly destroyed me. It was Emily's voice. Softer than I remembered, perhaps, but unmistakably hers. I struggled to answer. I was looking for a book. Brilliant, Damien. Truly inspiring. She smiled politely. Any particular genre? I stared at her for a second too long. Something flickered across her face. Not recognition. Curiosity. Are you okay? She asked. I forced myself to breathe. Sorry. Long drive. That explains it. She laughed lightly. You look exhausted. Emily used to say the exact same thing whenever I worked too much. The familiar phrase hit me like a wave. My chest tightened. Meanwhile, she simply waited for my answer, completely unaware of what was happening inside my head. Then another employee called her name from across the store. Emma. She turned immediately. Coming. Emma. She responded to it naturally, instinctively, as if she had lived with that name forever. Before walking away, she glanced back at me and smiled again. Take your time. Let me know if you need help finding anything. Then she disappeared between the shelves. I stood there surrounded by thousands of books and one impossible truth. Either Emily Carter had forgotten who she was, or someone had convinced her to forget. The human mind has a way of protecting itself from truths it cannot survive. That thought followed me for the rest of the day. I stayed inside the bookstore longer than necessary, pretending to browse shelves while secretly watching her move through the aisles. Emma Bennett. Every customer knew her by that name. Every coworker used it naturally. Nobody hesitated. Nobody looked confused. It was as if Emily Carter had never existed. By late afternoon, I had purchased 3 books I would probably never read and learned absolutely nothing useful. She recommended one of them to me herself. This one is my favorite, she said, sliding the novel across the counter with a warm smile. The ending is worth the wait. The irony nearly made me laugh. If only she knew how much waiting had already cost me. Our fingers brushed briefly as I accepted the book. A small, ordinary moment. Yet my heart reacted like it used to years ago. She did not. There was no spark of recognition in her eyes. No sudden memory. Nothing. Just kindness offered to a stranger. As evening approached, the store began to empty. Outside, golden sunlight reflected off the windows of nearby buildings. Boston looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Emily always loved cities that felt lived in rather than displayed. Places where people still greeted each other by name. Places where life moved slowly enough to notice. I remembered that as I watched her lock the front door at closing time. She stepped onto the sidewalk carrying the same canvas bag as the day before. This time I followed from farther away. Not because I wanted to invade her privacy, because I needed answers. She walked 6 blocks before stopping in front of a narrow brick townhouse covered in climbing ivy. Home. She climbed the front steps and disappeared inside. No security, no mystery, no sign that she was hiding from anyone. Just an ordinary woman returning home after work. My phone rang. Michael again. Any progress? He asked. No. I leaned against my car and stared at the townhouse. The more I learn, the less I understand. What if she truly does not remember? The question settled heavily between us. I had considered it. More than once. Memory loss existed. Trauma existed. People rebuilt lives after unimaginable circumstances. But something about this felt different. Too complete. Too clean. Almost rehearsed. Then a movement caught my attention. A light switched on in an upstairs window. A silhouette appeared briefly behind the curtains. Her silhouette. Familiar enough to make my chest ache. Damien. Michael's voice pulled me back. Are you still there? Yes. I swallowed hard. I am looking at her house. Silence. Then, carefully, he asked. And what are you going to do? I looked up toward the glowing window. 2 years ago, I would have forced my way toward answers. 2 years ago, I would have demanded explanations. But Emily had changed me long before she disappeared. She taught me that some truths cannot be taken. They have to be trusted into the light. I exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow I am going to introduce myself. Then the curtain moved. And for the briefest second, the woman in the window seemed to freeze as if she had seen me standing below. The next morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy I had not felt in years. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the curtain moving and the brief hesitation in her silhouette. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe I was imagining connections because I wanted them so badly. But hope has a way of turning ordinary moments into evidence. By 10 o'clock, I was standing outside the bookstore again. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. Sunlight spilled through the front windows, painting warm rectangles across the wooden floor. Emma was arranging a display near the entrance when she looked up and saw me. For the first time, her smile faltered. Only slightly. Only for a second. But I noticed. You are back, she said. I guess that means my book recommendation was not terrible. Her attempt at humor eased some of the tension in my chest. I have not finished it yet. Then I will not take the blame if the ending disappoints you. I smiled despite myself. There was that familiar warmth again. The same easy kindness that had always made people trust her. She returned to organizing books while I stood nearby, trying to find the courage to say what I had rehearsed all morning. Eventually she looked up. You seem like someone who wants to ask a question. Emily used to do that too. She always sensed when something was weighing on me. The memory nearly stopped me from speaking. Actually, I said carefully, I was wondering if you would have coffee with me sometime. Her expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. Not alarm, not discomfort, just surprise. That is a very direct question. I am trying something new. A small laugh escaped her. And here I thought you were just shopping for books. The conversation felt strangely normal, like two strangers meeting for the first time, which, in a way, was exactly what was happening. She studied me for a moment before answering. Coffee might not be a terrible idea. My heart reacted immediately, ridiculously, like a teenager instead of a man who had spent years learning how to control every emotion. Really? She shrugged lightly. You seem harmless enough. If only she knew. Then something changed. Her gaze drifted toward the silver compass necklace resting against her sweater. Instinctively, her fingers touched it. The movement froze me in place. She noticed my reaction immediately. What? She asked. I swallowed. That necklace. Her expression softened. It was a gift. The words hit me harder than I expected. From who? I asked quietly. For the first time since I had met her again, uncertainty crossed her face. Genuine uncertainty. She looked down at the pendant as if searching for an answer hidden inside it. That is the strange thing, she said slowly. I do not actually remember. My pulse stopped. Around us, Customers browsed shelves and conversations drifted through the store. Yet suddenly all I could hear was her voice. She touched the necklace again and frowned slightly. I have had it for years. At least I think I have. But every time I try to remember where it came from, everything gets blurry. Then she looked directly at me. Is that weird? I stared at her, unable to speak. Because for the first time since arriving in Boston, I was no longer the only person questioning the past. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the bookstore faded into the background as my mind raced through possibilities I had spent days trying not to consider. She remembered the necklace enough to keep wearing it. But she did not remember where it came from. It was like finding a door standing open in the middle of a locked room. Small, fragile, yet impossible to ignore. Emma glanced down at the compass pendant resting against her sweater. I know it sounds strange, she said quietly. Most people remember things like this. Not always, I replied. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She looked relieved by the answer. Good. Because sometimes I feel like there are pieces missing. My pulse quickened. Missing? She nodded slowly. Nothing dramatic. Just little things. Memories that should be there, but are not. A customer approached the counter before I could ask another question. Emma apologized and stepped away to help them. I moved toward a nearby shelf and pretended to examine a book while watching her from a distance. Missing memories. The words echoed in my head. Maybe Michael had been right. Maybe this was not deception. Maybe it was something else entirely. 20 minutes later, her shift ended. She found me sitting in a reading chair near the back of the store. You are still here. I smiled. You said coffee might not be a terrible idea. She laughed softly. I did say that. An hour later, we sat at a small cafe 2 blocks away. Rain tapped gently against the windows while people hurried along the sidewalk outside. It felt strangely familiar. Years ago, Emily and I had spent countless afternoons exactly like this, talking about nothing important until it somehow became everything important. Emma wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The gesture hit me immediately. Another habit. Another piece of the woman I thought I had lost. So, she said, studying me carefully, what brings you to Boston? The truthful answer sat heavily in my chest. You. I came because I buried you 2 years ago and somehow found you again. Instead, I said, I needed a change of scenery. She smiled knowingly. That sounds like a polite way of avoiding the real answer. Emily used to say that too. I looked away toward the rain-streaked glass. Maybe it is. Silence settled comfortably between us. Comfortable. That was the dangerous part. Nothing about this should have felt natural. Yet every minute beside her felt familiar in a way I could not explain. Then her expression changed slightly. Can I ask you something? Anything. She hesitated. Have we met before? My heart stopped. The question hung between us. She looked embarrassed immediately afterward. Sorry. That probably sounds ridiculous. Why would you ask that? She stared into her coffee. Because ever since you walked into the bookstore, I keep feeling like I should know you. Outside, rain continued falling across the city. Inside, my carefully constructed patience began to crack. Because for the first time, the feeling was not mine alone. The question stayed between us long after she asked it. I looked at her across the small cafe table, watching uncertainty flicker behind those familiar blue eyes. She seemed almost frustrated with herself. I know it sounds strange, she said quietly. I just cannot explain it. Rain continued tracing soft lines down the windows. Outside, Boston moved along as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Inside, my entire world balanced on a single conversation. Maybe some people just feel familiar, I said carefully. It was not a lie. It simply was not the whole truth. She studied me for a moment before nodding. Maybe. Yet neither of us sounded convinced. She looked down at her coffee and smiled faintly. You ever meet someone and feel like you started reading a book halfway through? The comparison caught me off guard because it sounded exactly like something Emily would have said years ago. Sometimes, I answered. Her smile widened slightly. That is what this feels like. My chest tightened. Every instinct pushed me to tell her everything. To explain who she was. To explain who we had been. To tell her about Sunday mornings, bookstores, white roses, and the life we had once planned together. But another voice reminded me how fragile this moment was. If she truly could not remember, forcing the truth onto her might only drive her away. So I stayed silent. After a while, the conversation drifted towards safer topics. Books, travel, favorite cities. She talked about Boston with genuine affection. She loved the harbor, The old architecture. The small independent businesses that still survived in a world of chains and corporations. Listening to her felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed for years. Then she mentioned something that made me pause. I moved here after recovering from an accident. My pulse immediately accelerated. An accident? She nodded. That is what I was told. Told. Not remembered. Told. I kept my expression neutral. You do not remember it. Her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. Not really. The answer came softly. Most of my memories started after I woke up in a hospital. The noise of the cafe seemed to disappear again. How long ago was that? Almost 2 years. Exactly 2 years. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. She looked away toward the rain. The doctors said memory can be complicated. They told me not to force it. And did it ever come back? She hesitated. Pieces. Feelings. Dreams sometimes. Her eyes returned to mine. Lately it has been happening more often. I could barely breathe. What kind of dreams? For a second, she seemed embarrassed. Then she laughed softly. You are going to think this sounds ridiculous. Try me. She looked down at the compass necklace resting against her sweater. There is always a man. My entire body went still. I never see his face clearly, she continued. But every time I wake up, I feel like I lost someone important. Then she met my eyes again. And for the first time since I arrived in Boston, something changed. Not recognition. Not memory. Something deeper. As if a part of her soul had recognized me before her mind could catch up. Some people spend their entire lives searching for proof that love is real. I was sitting across from proof, and it terrified me. Emma looked down at her coffee after admitting that she dreamed about a man she could not remember. A man whose absence followed her into every morning. The rain outside had softened into a light mist, turning the city beyond the window into a watercolor painting of gray and gold. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I was afraid that if I said the wrong thing, the fragile connection growing between us would disappear. Then she smiled awkwardly and shook her head. See? Ridiculous. No, I said quietly. Not ridiculous. She looked up. You really think so? I nodded. I think some things stay with us even when we cannot explain why. Her expression softened, almost relieved, as if she had been waiting for someone to say exactly that. We stayed at the cafe until evening. Hours passed without either of us noticing. We talked about books, childhood memories, favorite places, and small details that most people would consider unimportant. Yet every answer she gave revealed another piece of the woman I remembered. She still loved old bookstores. She still preferred rainy days over sunny ones. She still believed that kindness mattered more than success. The details were different, but the heart behind them had never changed. When we finally stepped outside, the streets glistened beneath the glow of streetlights. Emma pulled her coat tighter against the cool air. I should probably head home. I knew she was right. I also knew I was not ready to leave. Can I see you again? The question escaped before I could stop it. She smiled. A real smile. Warm and effortless. I was hoping you would ask. Something inside me loosened. A knot I had carried for 2 years suddenly felt lighter. We walked together for several blocks before reaching the corner where our paths separated. She stopped beneath a street lamp and looked at me carefully. There is something strange about you, Damien. My pulse immediately quickened. Strange good or strange bad? She laughed softly. I have not decided yet. Then her smile faded slightly. But every time I talk to you, I feel like I am remembering something. The world seemed to hold its breath. What kind of something? I asked. She touched the compass necklace again. The gesture had become almost unconscious. I do not know. Her voice dropped. That is the frustrating part. We stood there in silence. Cars passed. Wind stirred fallen leaves along the sidewalk. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary city. Yet nothing about the moment felt ordinary. Then Emma suddenly frowned. A brief shadow crossed her face. Her hand moved to her temple. Are you okay? I asked immediately. She blinked several times. Just a headache. The words came slowly. It happens sometimes. Concern tightened in my chest. Do you need help getting home? She shook her head. No. It will pass. But as she lowered her hand, something slipped from her coat pocket and landed on the sidewalk between us. A folded photograph. I bent down and picked it up before she could. Then I froze. Because staring back at me from the photograph was Emily Carter, and I was standing beside her. My hand tightened around the photograph so suddenly that the paper bent at the corner. Emma looked down, confusion crossing her face. "What is it?" she asked. I could not answer. Not immediately. The image felt heavier than it should have. It had been taken on a bright autumn afternoon years ago. Emily stood beside me in Central Park holding a paper cup of coffee while laughing at something I had said. I remembered that day. I remembered the wind. I remembered the exact shade of gold in the leaves behind her. Most of all, I remembered how happy she looked. Yet somehow that photograph had found its way into Emma Bennett's pocket. "Damien." Her voice pulled me back. I looked up. She was staring at me now, concern replacing confusion. Slowly, I turned the photograph toward her. The moment her eyes landed on it, all color drained from her face. The reaction was immediate, instinctive, real. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. My heart pounded. "It fell from your pocket." She took the photograph carefully. Her fingers trembled. "That is impossible." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Why?" I asked. She continued staring at the image. "Because I have never seen this before." The street around us seemed to disappear. Cars passed. Traffic lights changed. People walked by without noticing that two lives were quietly unraveling beneath a street lamp. Emma's breathing became uneven. "I do not understand." She looked from the photograph to me and back again. Who was this woman? The question hurt more than I expected. Her name was Emily Carter. Silence. Then her eyes widened slightly. I swallowed hard. Everyone believed she died 2 years ago. Emma stared at the photograph again. The wind lifted a strand of her blonde hair across her face. "She looks exactly like me." "Yes." Her gaze shifted to me. "And the man standing beside her?" For a moment I considered lying, pretending none of this involved me, pretending I was not standing inside the center of the mystery. But Emily had always hated lies. So I told the truth. "That is me." The world seemed to stop. Emma looked back at the image, then at me, then back at the image again. Her expression slowly changed from confusion to disbelief. "That is not possible." I understood, because I had been repeating those exact words for days. Suddenly, she pressed her fingers against her temple again. Harder this time. A flash of pain crossed her face. "Emma." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I know this place." My pulse exploded. "What?" Her breathing quickened. "The park." She stared at the photograph as if it were speaking directly to her. "I know this park." My heart stopped. "How?" She looked terrified by her own answer. "I do not know." Then her eyes filled with tears she clearly did not understand. "But when I look at this picture," her voice broke. "It feels like I am looking at my own life. There are moments that divide a life into before and after." Standing beneath that street lamp, watching tears gather in Emma's eyes as she stared at a photograph of her own forgotten past, I knew we had reached one of those moments. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The city continued around us while everything inside our small corner of the world stood completely still. Emma held the photograph carefully, as though it might break if she touched it too firmly. "I do not understand," she whispered again. "How can this feel familiar if I have never seen it before?" I looked at her and realized something important. For days I had been focused on proving who she was. I had been chasing answers, chasing certainty, chasing the past. But standing there, I finally understood that none of that mattered as much as I thought it did. Because the woman in front of me was already fighting her own battle. She was not hiding the truth. She was searching for it. Slowly, I stepped closer. Not enough to overwhelm her. Just enough so she would not feel alone. "You do not have to figure everything out tonight," I said softly. She looked up at me. Moonlight and streetlight reflected in eyes I had thought I would never see again. What if I never remember? The question broke my heart. Not because of what it meant for me, because of what it meant for her. 2 years of missing memories. 2 years of living with invisible gaps. 2 years of wondering why certain places, songs, and dreams felt strangely familiar. I took a slow breath. "Then you do not remember." She stared at me, surprised. "That is it." I nodded. Memories matter. But they are not the only thing that makes someone who they are. A tear slipped down her cheek. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple." I smiled sadly. "I just think you are still the same person, whether you remember every chapter or not." For a moment, emotion flickered across her face. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed softly through her tears. The sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You know," she said, shaking her head, "every time I talk to you, I feel calmer." My heart tightened. Emily used to tell me the exact opposite. She used to joke that I carried storms around with me. Maybe she had been right. Maybe loving her had been the only thing that ever taught me how to find peace. Emma looked down at the photograph one final time before carefully folding it and placing it back into her pocket. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, not as a stranger, not as a mystery, as someone who mattered. "I would like to see you again," she said quietly. I smiled. "I would like that too." We stood there a little longer before finally saying goodnight. I watched her walk home beneath the glow of streetlights, the compass necklace catching flashes of silver with each step. And for the first time in 2 years, I did not feel like a man trapped in grief. I felt like a man standing at the beginning of something. Maybe memory would return. Maybe it would not. Maybe answers would come tomorrow. Maybe they would take years. But as I watched her disappear around the corner, I realized something Emily had been trying to teach me all along. Love was never about holding on to the past. It was about choosing someone again and again, even when the future was uncertain. And if fate had somehow given us a second chance, I was not going to waste it.